On Saturday, former President Donald Trump making this post, lashing out, saying he expects to be arrested on Tuesday of next week, writing, "Protests, take our nation back." The possible indictment comes as Manhattan's prosecutors investigate Trump's alleged role in a $130,000 hush money payment made to adult film star Stormy Daniels days before the 2016 presidential election. The former president has denied wrongdoing and did not reveal details on why he expects to be indicted. His spokesperson said he did not receive notification about any possible indictment from prosecutors.
The events of this case stretch back 6 or 7 years. It's tracking his. So all of this creates a bit of a mess, both legally but sort of practically.
On Saturday, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy says a potential arrest is, quote, an outrageous abuse of power, and calls for all relevant committees to immediately investigate if federal funds are being used to subvert our democracy by interfering in elections with politically motivated prosecutions. If the former president is indicted, it would mark a historic first.
That means you've got a prisoner who's arriving in a motorcade with a security cordon, escorted by armed Secret Service agents. You'd have to go through that process of getting his fingerprints, shooting his mug shots.
On Monday, another witness is expected to testify before a grand jury in Manhattan. It's not clear whether this would be the final witness before voting on a possible indictment. I'm Isabel Rosales reporting.
Drinking.
These are a couple of... And I can't find a seconder usually when I propose this, but I don't care. I don't need a seconder. My own opinion is enough for me, and I claim the right to have it defended against any consensus, any majority, anywhere, any place, any time. And anyone who disagrees with this, pick a number, get online, and kiss my hand.
No representation is made that the quality of legal services to be performed are greater than the legal services provided by other lawyers. I'm Harry Steele. You found the Backstreet Podcast. What are we up to? Number 147. Where's Wallardo? I'm joined today by journalist Brandon Mosley. How's life in Moody, Alabama, Mr. Mosley?
It's been a little bit cold in the mornings, but we can adapt.
So, our cover story here. Now, this comes from mynbc15.com. Mobile County Sheriff's Office fugitive is allegedly, and of course, he is the former director of the Alabama Safety Institute. Brandon, were you around for the great purge that occurred? You remember Bob Riley came in and he said, I'm going to raise $1 billion in taxes. And that failed, and then he said, okay, I'm going in the other direction, and we're going to get rid of all these cars, and we'll get rid of all these people that we can outsource. One of the places they outsourced, I think, and it was wildly negligent of them to do so, similar to what they did to the mental health care system here in Alabama, and this is the result. They privatized the court referral officers who previously had been sworn officers of the court, right? They had guns and badges and arrest power, and they created the need for each county to have, I guess most of them have gone to a not-for-profit corporation with some kind of a board, and, you're ordered into the program, and then these people who don't really work for the state but who are subcontractors then hold your freedom in their hand. And so I think that's enough of a setup to start reading the article. So NBC 15 has confirmed fugitive Gordon Waller, the former director of the Alabama Safety Institute, charged with extortion, has been captured after 15 years on the run. A source familiar with the case confirms Waller was captured in the Philippines and will be brought back to the United States. After he was tried in absentia in 2007 and convicted of 2 counts of extortion, second degree, and 1 count of extortion, first degree. He was in charge of the court referral program that monitored young men placed on formal probation by the court. During that time, Waller made threats to a probationer under his supervision and ordered that probationer to perform sexual acts or go back to jail. Any shock in your mind about absolute power and how it corrupts. I mean, this is just
If
another
you give
example.
someone power over other people, history tells us they will use it.
I mean, this isn't exactly Abu Ghraib either. I mean, this guy was allegedly using the internet to find people who would pay to have sex with these young probationers. And I want to say there were, let's put it this way. I anticipate that we will never see this man. When I was initially told about this, they said, man, this guy's going to get Epstein. He knows way too much on too many people that were partaking in the party, so to speak.
I would much rather have spent the last 15 years on a beach in the Philippines than in an Alabama prison.
Okay, so what if I told you that Lanyap had an article this week where they contacted the FBI, and the FBI says they don't have him, and they don't know what the Mobile County Sheriff's Department is talking about?
Getting someone extradited from the Philippines, giving some of their, I don't want to be harsh here, the corruption in their system. If you've got money, I kind of think you can get unextradited.
Well, in the Philippines don't necessarily like us very much. So disgraced Mobile DUI school director reportedly arrested in the Philippines. You know, here's the article from the lanyap.com website, and nobody seems to know where old Wallardo is. And like I said,
I hope he can be brought back for trial and punishment for his crimes, but I suspect the next time he faces judgment will be before St. Peter.
I'm afraid you might be right. So the Alabama Safety Institute, their description, and they have this website, but they tell us that their board members are like high-ranking public officials and this kind of thing, but you know, they don't list their board members on their website. They aren't listed on their 990, which is what they're required to file every year, but with the federal government. So their programs include driver education, substance abuse education, anger management, and crimes of theft. The substance abuse education program is monitored under contract from the Alabama State Administrative Office of Courts. So, Brandon, do you think that this board treated this as anything serious, or do you think they might have put, you know, programs in place to make sure, or checks in place to make sure, internal controls to take from the business side of the ledger, to make sure that someone in charge of the program can't exploit people like this in the future? I certainly don't think so, because the people I talked to all thought Gordon Wilde was innocent.
I don't know how you can create a situation where someone is like a parole officer or a probation officer and them not be able to abuse that power. Because again, you know, the people they're overseeing are known miscreants and lawbreakers. And so obviously the burden of proof is on the accuser, and accusers aren't normally, most people aren't going to assume that, you know, the probationers are the most honest, you know, witnesses, you know, if they make such an accusation. In this case, it appears, since he fled, that, yeah.
And there were computer forensics too. It wasn't just these people's word. They were, you know, once they got into the investigation. So in Baldwin County, we have a drug court foundation. Do you know that? As many as 60% of crimes committed in Baldwin County have some relationship to drug or alcohol abuse. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, people insist on entertaining themselves with drugs and alcohol, and I mean,
so here's the Dun & Bradstreet on Baldwin Court Services. Over $1 million in revenues. They have 14 employees. 14 employees. And you can see here they're getting some kind of grant. I guess that's from the Drug Court Foundation or something. And then the rest of it's program services, which means $20 a pop for a drug test, right? So everybody on probation that's ordered to go to drug testing has to go use this not-for-profit. And guess who all's on the board over there? Jonathan Armstrong, the program director, Chip Kaysen, Mike Dassinger, an attorney, Richard Heiss, Michael Hoyt, an attorney, and the head of the Republican Party in Baldwin County, Carol Kemp. She's our juvenile court referee. Joe Norton, one of our current circuit judges, and then Al Tolbert, the chief of police and the head of the major crimes unit in Baldwin County, who subsequently to 4 years ago was a corporal in the sheriff's department.
We're trying to keep. I mean, we've got overcrowded prisons. Our jails are, I won't say overcrowded, but they're pretty close. So you need to both punish people and try to get them rehabilitated while out of jail if possible. And this is another organization, like Community Corrections, that, is tasked with that very difficult mission.
Right. So let's talk about the elephant in the room. We started the podcast with a short clip and a statement from President Trump. I don't know, what platform is he still on? I know this isn't
He's
Twitter.
got his own Truth Social social media. I think I started an account there, but I haven't updated it.
So instead of retweets, they have retruths. Do you see that?
I guess so. Remember, he was kicked off of Facebook and Twitter, so he decided to create his own. Of course, now Elon Musk has since bought Twitter and invited him back, but he's sunk money into this Truth Social. So Trump supporters can talk with Trump, and nobody else really is there. But
now illegal leaks from a corrupt and highly political Manhattan District Attorney's Office, which has allowed new records to be set in violent crime and whose leader is funded by George Soros, indicate that with no crime being able to be proven and based on an old and fully debunked by numerous other prosecutors fairy tale, the far and away leading Republican candidate and former President of the United States of America will be arrested on Tuesday of next week. Protest, take our nation back. So, the last time this guy called for a protest, all hell broke loose. Do you imagine, do you think people are going to mass at the courthouse for the Southern District of New York and protest this? I'm sure there'll be some. It's a long train trip for a lot of these Trump supporters to get to New York City.
Yeah, I remember on January 6th, I was getting invitations to, hey, Brennan, come join the bus. We're headed up to D.C. I'm like,
don't think I didn't get one.
I'm like, well, what's going to happen? It can't be that big a deal. Trump's going to give a speech, and then the Congress is going to do their duty and declare Biden the president, and no news here. I missed that one.
Well, I didn't. I wanted to live stream it, and Paul and Raines were like, man, there ain't nothing going to happen. Well, I'm not going to sit there and listen to these idiots. Happen. Well,
and then all of a sudden everything happened at noon that day, and I'm like, oh, wow.
Yeah, by 3 o'clock, we were live streaming. I promise you. So let's talk about, let's flip over here for a second and watch something else real quick.
Patrick McHenry. Good morning. Good to have you here in person.
Great to be here.
I want to go into the banking crisis, but I first want to ask you about a bit of business in regard to what Speaker McCarthy has said. He's directing Congress to investigate, he tweeted, whether federal funds are being used by the state of New York, where a grand jury may soon indict the 45th president. Why is he issuing this threat? And isn't this kind of congressional investigation just using federal funds from U.S. tax?
Because if he doesn't, he can be removed by one single vote. Everybody remembers that little intricacy of his leadership, right?
Taxpayers. on a political errand?
Well, I haven't had an opportunity to talk to Speaker McCarthy overnight since that tweet, nor Chairman Comer of the Oversight and Investigations Committee, nor Chairman Jordan of the Judiciary Committee. I'm chair of the House Financial Services Committee. I've been caught up in a bit of the turbulence in the banking sector.
But you're one of the top leading Republicans. I mean, do you agree with federal money being used on a state investigation or casting doubt? What is it about?
The question here, and I think the viable question for the American people, is whether or not you have a progressive prosecutor using the justice system to go after political enemies for a political splash. And that seems to be the case here. With the Manhattan DA. But as I said, I spent most of my time focused on what's at hand. But that's
Do you think
that's
it's a
what
good
it looks
use of
like.
taxpayer money?
Well, I think it's a questionable use of taxpayer money to allow a prosecutor to use the justice system to go after somebody
That's a problem for New Yorkers, isn't it? But the federal government
it's becoming a problem for Americans when you see people targeted. And that's the reason why Speaker McCarthy set up the Weaponization of Government Committee within the Judiciary Committee, and that's the reason why Jim Jordan is leading that effort.
But you're trying now to focus on things of substance that are at crisis level in the banking sector. Should one of the too big to fail banks, the large, systemically important banks, be able to step in here and buy up a troubled bank like First Republic?
I think all options should be on the table. That's what I'm considering legislatively. That's what I would encourage the administration to consider as well.
Is there anything that would block that kind of white knight rescue?
Well, that's what we have to get to the bottom of. At the moment, I think it's important that American people have confidence in the financial system and their bank. And I think that is the imperative right now. That's the reason why I supported the FDIC and Fed's and Treasury's decision last Sunday night. I thought it was an imperative for the country. Now, what I need to get to the bottom of.
Now, that decision was to ensure deposits over the FDIC insured $250,000 limit.
Of investigatively in Congress is the who, what, when, where, why, and how of these bank failures, and the decisions
Signature
made over,
and Silicon Valley.
That's right. And then the decision made over the weekend. We saw a private sector response to help support a bank.
Right.
Was that a viable option last weekend, or was there an ideological lens that prevented them from taking these institutions and making it less turbulent for America?
That's why I was asking the question.
So, Brandon, it's either a good buy for these banks or it's not a good buy for these banks. I don't think they're doing anything out of the goodness of their hearts. Do you?
I kind of agree with letting the big banks buy the troubled banks, because you don't want a small bank, trying to buy a group of assets that were losing money so badly that bank that owned them failed. I kind of don't like these big multinational, multi-state banks. Kind of wish we hadn't have gone this route. But something like Silicon Valley or New Republic, I don't want my neighborhood bank going there and buying that. Or a group of investors decide to get the banking business by buying this at a flea market. It takes a big bank to, assume all these assets and deal with whatever problems they're having, because I'm sure a lot of their depositors, even though they've been made whole by the FDIC and then some, probably wish they were dealing with someone else at this point.
Okay, so the first draft of history is already on Wikipedia about the bank failures. It says, during March 2023, two large banks in the United States with significant exposure in the technology sector or to cryptocurrency failed, while another entered liquidation under financial distress. On March 16th, large interbank flows of funds were occurring to shore up bank balance sheets, and numerous analysts were reporting on more general U.S. banking crisis. Let's skip on down. The first bank to fail, cryptocurrency-focused Silvergate Bank, announced it would wind down on March 8th due to losses suffered on its loan portfolio. 2 days later, upon announcement of an attempt to raise capital, a bank run occurred at Silicon Valley Bank, causing a collapse and it to be seized by regulators that day. So Silicon Valley Bank, let's just say you're PayPal, and they're the ones that gave you the money to get into business, and you have a payroll account, and you have a general fund account, and you have a payroll clearing fund account, and all these different accounts, and you know that money is, let's say you got $1 million washing in and out every month, right? You know those deposits over $250 are not covered by FDIC. But what this Silicon Valley Bank would do is turn around and say, you know what, if you'll keep all these deposits here with us, we'll make below rate mortgages for your executives.
Well, you and I can remember when the cap on deposits was $100,000.
Absolutely.
But that was also the day that Brandon or Harry could go down and buy a new car and a house for $100,000. I mean, there was $80,000 houses and $5,000 cars. So they have raised, after the bank failure crisis in 2008, they raised the cap to like $250,000, $260,000. But $260,000 is not the money that it was 20 or 40 years ago. That, I think they probably should raise the cap to like $1 million, because it's, you don't have to be a huge company to have $1 million in like your checking account just to make payroll now.
Well, just looking at this breakdown right here, it looks like the majority of loans made by these small banks are for commercial real estate, 67% of them. So, and other consumer loans, 15% auto loans, credit cards. Anyway, I think it's going to put a crunch on things that happen regionally. I mean, think about let's think of a bank that's come into Whitney. Hancock is now in Alabama. That new Iberia Bank out of Louisiana, they did a lot of commercial loans. Bryant Bank out of Tuscaloosa is a regional bank that's kind of spread its legs since Colonial went under.
Yeah, Bancorp South got took over by Cadence.
So, at one point in time, Birmingham had 5 or 6 corporate headquarters for banking, and now
not anymore. That seems like ancient history. Now, I remember when South Trust had that big tower in the center of town, and
regions,
all those companies were like rocking.
Yep, not anymore. And you can see the unrealized gains and losses of each bank, and you can see Silicon Valley just doesn't look real great. So, Brandon, let's get back to Alabama, and you were there for the special session, and you saw the guts and whatever. Do you think it would be useful for us to listen to the Speaker Pro Tem real quick?
Sure.
It's been our responsibility at the state level to appropriate this $1.1 billion for the benefit of the people of Alabama. We've been able to move through that process this week. All the membership has been very involved and engaged. One of the things that we wanted to look at, of course, was hospitals, nursing homes, those that were providing care during the pandemic, which was very important. They had a lot of reimbursable requirements. Also looking at water sewer projects. Basically, if you're looking at investing in Alabama, you're trying to put infrastructure in the ground that's going to be there for the next 30, 40, 50 years. That's going to be very important for the people of our state. We did that in the first round of ARPA. We're doing that again. There's going to wind up being hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of infrastructure investment in our state. Broadband internet access, which is a huge issue for Alabamians, trying to make sure everyone across the state is able to access the internet.
By giving money to private corporations.
And that helps us not only in quality of life, but as far as topics of economic growth and development, healthcare with telemedicine, and of course, as we learned through the pandemic, our children's education sometimes needs to be done from home, and that gives us an opportunity to grow that opportunity as well. We worked diligently to make sure this was a bipartisan effort. There's elements all across Alabama, no matter where you are, that there are going to be benefits for these ARPA funds. I make it my business to work closely with my colleagues in the minority caucus. I have a great friendship with Senator Singleton, who's my minority leader. He and I are great buddies. We work closely and carefully together. This is a topic. Sometimes we disagree, as you would expect, but in this instance, there was a lot of collaboration, a lot of cooperation in making sure that we got these funds where we thought Alabama would benefit the most in being able to use them. And so I'm proud of that.
Was established some time ago, and it was quasi function of the court, to where people would get DUIs in traffic school. They paid the school, and this school would be able to. I think it sometimes if you paid the fine, went to school. At one time, I don't know if they still do that, where you had points on your record, but in Florida they did. But this school has been around. Some of the board members are former Sheriff Sam Cochran, Joe Prichard, who was Alabama State Trooper, Charlie McNichol, your buddy over there,
911 director who passes out in his car
right
3 times a year,
and he's overseeing why they haven't asked him to resign yet. I have still no clue. I presented that, but and I don't necessarily like people getting in trouble, but there are certain standards that you try to adhere to. But long story short, this school was created, and it was a creation of its own beast there in Mobile. Chief Collier, who was our chief court police officer in the county, it was one of the first to tell me, on top of former law enforcement officials, that they would give cash envelopes away at these Christmas parties for benefits, because again, this is a nonprofit organization that was created. And why the court system doesn't have their own, but long story short, this guy Gordon Waller, who when I first met him in politics just gave me the heebie-jeebies, and I normally have met everybody like you and Brandon in my life, so I mean, not too many people could scare me off, but this guy gave off a bad vibe. Just looked, just not right, and had this influence with the judges, not just Judge Thomas, who we all remember became the spanking judge, and would check people out of prison. This guy, Gordon Waller, would check people out of jail just like Judge Thomas. And in fact, rumor has it, Judge Thomas was helping him. There was this, it's not funny. It's a cycle of taking advantage of people who are before the courts. I would say probably 75% of them young black men. And why the black community is not up in arms about this is beyond me. But they would take advantage, the school and the judges like Thomas, and I'm sure others, would take advantage of mainly young men. I'm sure at point I heard young women. They asked me to sit on the board, and I immediately distanced myself just from the one meeting I had with them. And so this guy ends up, obviously hit for corruption, embezzlement, wire fraud, et cetera, exploitation. And John Tyson, was prosecuting. Supposedly the federal people were prosecuting him, but, they're just going to, come after people like me that smoke a joint and own a legal firearm. But, they didn't go out. They allowed this guy to have Gordon Waller. They allowed him. He had a yard sale 2 days before he fled to the Philippines. Everybody saw him having this thing. I'm talking about, I had phone calls. Hey, you see, he's selling everything. And you would think the authorities would have enough sense to, to figure this out. And 2 days later, he was gone.
Hey,
15 years later.
Steve, what do you think would have happened if you'd have put your house on the market and had a big estate sale ahead of your criminal?
Yeah. Well, there's no doubt. I mean, this is just, I mean, it's par for the course. And, you know, how it relates to Baldwin County, you know, there are some similarities and some issues that cross between all these law enforcement guys know what the hell's going on. My good friend Trey Oliver's on that, you know, the former warden's on there, on this Alabama Safety Institute. And why the county, and I had some discussions this week because I'm pissed off about it, only because I know they're taking advantage of the people who can be taken advantage of, and nothing's really been done. So long story short, this story pops up that the FBI has apprehended him in the Philippines. And I checked with numerous sources, both former and with agencies and with law enforcement. One report says that, yeah, they do indeed have him, and he's squealing like a pig. What he could squeal on, I don't know, other than who was involved with it at the time. I think by this time, 15 years later, there's not too many that could be prosecuted for it. But
the statutes and limitations would have run out after 15 years.
Yeah. And so, but he has the secrets of all this ring of pedophilia, like the Brittany Woods case. Rob Holbert brought it up to me, and I couldn't remember it. I was obviously busy with my own situation. That this child sex ring in Baldwin County with Brittany Woods, who's still missing to this day.
And no one has looked
been
for
making
her.
money all this time. I'm sure he has friends who have information they don't want out there.
There's no doubt.
Funds.
No doubt. And listen, I had numerous phone calls from. I'm going to keep. I have to. Obviously, my sources have to remain. But I got some pretty good sources, and I never had that many phone calls in my life about, did you hear they got Gordon Wally here? And then it turns out, and I just checked Friday, I think it was, that from another high-ranking source that don't know how that rumor got started. So there's a report that says they have him, one report doesn't. All I know is he wouldn't be popping up in the newspaper and a news report 15 years later unless there was a reason. And, not that I'm a conspiracy theorist. I am all about how people collude, particularly in law enforcement, sometimes for the benefit of the protection of the public. And I would say 90% of that time. But there's 10% of the time you have to keep these people in check. And I don't care how long they've been there, where they've been, and how much service they've had to their community, that people like Gord Waller should have never been able to walk away to the Philippines. We can't imagine what the guy was doing over there. He was a pedophile to begin with. And, he was tried in absentia. But how this system between the FBI in the ABI and all these agencies that had this guy dead to rights, this organization, and what he was doing with it, how we years later ended up prosecuting Judge Thomas, though there was some mistrial. But I wrote about it. I spoke about it. I knew a lot about it, and I wanted that son of a bitch out of our building down at the county. And it wasn't for anything other than protection of children and the system itself. Little did I know the system would come back and bite me in the ass years later, which I gave him a good enough reason to. But my problem is when you have a systemic thing like the Alabama Safety Institute, like I said, that is sucking taxpayers' money into a system. Now, once they got rid of them, supposedly they revamped it. And but still, I don't think I don't think law enforcement should be on. I don't think Sam Cochran should be on it. Trey Oliver, I've known them for 30 years and respect what they've done for the community. But this is another systematic thing. And this is what I told. I said, it's amazing. Ashley Rich came and created this huge war with Mobile County over the state funding. And Brandon, you know about this, these AG's office. The district attorney's office. And, the county's not equipped for that. We have no responsibility. The state created it. It pushed it off on the county. Ashley Witch went to court. As you know, Mobile County ended up giving $1.4 million. I could assure you, if I was a commissioner, that wouldn't happen. I mean, that you can't have this. My bottom line is that this Alabama school, the Safety Institute, should be able to fund the AG's office rather than come back to the county commission and suck money out of the general fund when we're supposed to be roads and bridges and taking care of the people. But, you know, the deal is that this is one more system that a bunch of good old boys sit upon, which, just like the food fund, y'all remember the food fund, y'all had it up there, Brandon. And it's just one more example of a system, an archaic system within the judicial system of Alabama. Right, wrong, you know, I still contend Jack Tillman was in all proper with the food fund in alliance of what the state statute said, but the state statute should have been changed and everybody should have known that. And the deal is they allowed the sheriff to keep usurping money off the food fund for personal, you know, under the Constitution for personal gain, which they are able to do to this day. Well, maybe Brandon, you could fill me in on that.
They changed it. They changed it in 2019.
Yeah. So that's the story of Gordon Waller. Freaked me out. And I heard that from so many people that the guy, it was just creepy. And this popped up on the radar. And like I said, this got more phone calls than Trump being arrested on Tuesday.
So I think the reason that everyone was glad for this guy to go is because of who the board members were at the time, that they weren't properly supervising the director and his staff, that they showed up for steak dinners and photo ops and shit like that, and to sign the 990s
envelopes full of cash. Here you go. Merry Christmas.
I don't have any personal knowledge of that, but there's got to be some reason these people,
Well, if you're like the sheriff of Mobile County, you're overseeing your entire sheriff's department. You're a politician as well, so you've got to travel around the county to political gatherings and things, and then you're on all these little boards. Do you think most of those people who are very busy and have full schedules are paying that much attention when they're on the oversight board of something like the Alabama Safety Institute? They just
I agree with that.
They probably miss half the meetings when they show up. It's like, how soon can we get out of here? Because I got another event to go to.
Well, and it's kind of like, to the point, 911 board over in Mobile County. How many times your director going to be found passed out at the wheel of his county car before you discipline him?
And releasing information out from a federal prosecutor's office and being fired from David York's office I would think that would be, you know, I'm all for giving people an 8 and a break, but you know, this is Charlie McNichol. You know, they're all on the same. You know, like I said, there's this long relationship. I'm sure it's all. I mean, I believe it. Most of it's done in good faith, but there's just too much of a conflict. And like Brandon was saying, these boards. I never sat on a board. When I was a county commissioner, I just refused to. I really didn't want. I mean, first of all, I had my hands full to begin with, but I didn't want to have any type of conflict. And that's not to say I was the most perfect person in the world, but I try to distance myself from a lot of this and stay out of it. But this became problematic when Chief Collier came up to me, and this is no relation to Spencer. I think you were referring to that, Harry, that this was. I think at one time Spencer Collier was on that board, the former director of AELA, whatever.
That's right.
Yeah, so I think
he was in the House, wasn't he, Brandon? He was a House member.
Enough representatives. Finally, decided to, because he had a law enforcement background, made him our first ALEA director.
Yeah, that's right.
And then he bit the hand.
Yeah.
Well, I think when.
Yeah. But, I don't know what was going on at that. I just remember some of the board members, and I was thinking to myself, this is not a group that, they made Gary Tanner over there, the Homeland Security Director. And, with my extensive background and over 20 years in Homeland Security, going I actually went to the Naval Postgraduate School for Homeland Security. Gary Tanner ends up with the Homeland Security directorship over there. Hell, he still might be there. Who knows?
Okay, so I got a good Gary Tanner story. When he was, I guess he was he had Charlie's job first, right? 911 director about 5-6 years ago. Is that right?
Yeah, I think they're correct. Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, they go and buy all of this radio equipment, right?
Oh, I do remember
Except
that.
it's incompatible.
Hurricane Communications, I know, in Chickasaw.
I know it well. Just set $5 million on fire. Like it, by the time they got it installed, it was obsolete.
Right.
Unbelievable. So recycling these guys. I mean, maybe we want Gordon Wilder to come back and run our program over here in Baldwin County.
Well, you're right, and Brandon's right. There's so many young people, new young people I've always, look, I've seen it over and over, Mobile. To this day, it still happens. It's the same people. They appoint the same people to the same thing. And, even though we're enjoying success, it's in spite of ourselves. Trust me. I mean, think so, Brandon?
Yeah, the greater economy is just doing so strong. Inflation is a side effect of that, unless you're just entirely incompetent where business avoids you, you look like you're doing great.
Yeah, and I had this discussion, and I don't know if we talked about it here, and it was from a well-known Washington Examiner columnist who I'm close to. And I was talking about these surpluses, and I even spoke to a few commissioners throughout the state that enjoyed these surpluses, from COVID. And I've always believed that, outside of state statute of having 3 months of reserve into your coffers, the last thing you need to do is be shelling up a $70 or $100 million surplus and counting it. Because that's not what your job is. Your job is for taxation to be equal of what you pay for services. And the deal is we've gotten away from that. Cities and counties are not in the business of making money, and nor should they. That's when they get into a heap of trouble.
Yeah, but we're in a unique circumstance here where through the CARES Act and through ARPA, which we discussed previously, the federal government has poured $55 billion into the state of Alabama that's normally not here. It just schools are getting it. They're out hiring people. And so our tax collections are abnormally high. So if you spend all that money, what do you have, in 2 years when there's no longer any ARPA money that the federal government just created through deficit spending and dumped?
Yeah. Well, then you start lulling. I agree with that, but I also agree it lulls you into a false sense of security that things are going to be. Government usually grows, if anything, at 3%. And you start, bumping that up to 20-25%. You start become accustomed to spending that money like that. And that's my fear that, government will come back and quit. The money may stop coming in, but the spending may not.
Yeah, I can remember covering, this wasn't that many years ago, a state general fund budget of like $1.6 billion. I think the one we're talking about now is like $2.9 billion. And, the education budgets had even bigger growth.
Oh, yeah.
So has everybody realized that spring break is in full swing? It's
not for the legislature. They wait another week.
So no threat yet to spring break in Alabama as massive seaweed bloom drifts into the Gulf.
Yes, I posted that online. As you know, I'm an avid. This is not a spray tan. Just to let y'all know.
Is that right?
This is what's very close to my heart, as you know. And they're really catching hell down there in Sarasota, St. Pete, and Clearwater Beach right now. But I'm hoping it stays away from us. So yeah, I'm looking at the map right there, and I'm very familiar with those beaches also. There's not a beach I don't visit when I'm traveling. So yeah, I saw that, and it's about, how big is it? What did it say, Harry? How big is that thing?
It's like twice the size of the continental United States, I think.
Jeez.
Yeah, there it is. So there's a, and Steve, I know you like the beach. I like diving and going offshore fishing. And so when you're running out in the Gulf and you come to a tide line, a lot of times what you'll find is this sargassum weed floating on top, and there's all kinds of critters that live in it and ling under it, and blackfish and all kinds of good stuff to eat. Chicken, dolphin, you can sit there and catch dolphin all day long. Yeah. But this Great Atlantic Sargassum Belt, floats between Africa and here. And if you know anything about the global ecosystem, there are these lakes that dry up in Africa every year, and the wind blows all the little diatom particles across, and it fertilizes the rainforest down in Brazil and the Amazon and everything else. But some of those drop into the water, and that is what brings on this bloom, that and other, fertilizers and other things that we don't mean to, nutrients from sewer, human waste and everything else.
I think
causes a bloom like this, but we've never seen one like this before, right?
Part of the problem was, before we had commercial fertilizer, you wanted to be in the bottoms. You wanted to plant corn or cotton or whatever you were growing in the bottom. So they planted, like you go through Mississippi, Arkansas, a lot of stuff we would consider a wetland got cleared, and, there's a little pond beside it where they run the water. And all the way to the Mississippi River is cropland. And then we developed commercial fertilizer. And, the reason you did it before was those fields got all, when the rivers flooded, it picked up all that organic matter and silt. So, they were more fertile than more dry land type farming. And then we got commercial fertilizer, and all of a sudden you're fertilizing all the way to the riverbank. And naturally, when, we have a flood or heavy rain, a lot of your fertilizer that was intended for your crops ends up in a river, and the river takes it to the ocean.
Yeah, and another thing, back to the map of Sarasota and St. Pete area and whatnot, they're also having a red tide bloom, and it's calling a bunch of fish kills and causing people to have respiratory irritation. I don't know if y'all have ever been at the beach, but when there's a red tide.
And you just can't stand it. Even this is here. Actually, it was in Gulf Shores. This must have been about 15, probably 20 years ago. And you literally can't, your eyes burn. You can hardly breathe. You feel like you're being choked out. And it could be a bright, sunny day. It wouldn't matter.
So the bad news about this stuff is that have y'all ever picked some up and examined it? It's got like these little balls on it, and when you squeeze them, like some kind of oily residue, petroleum looking stuff comes out. Well, I'm glad I didn't do a whole lot of that, because this stuff's full of arsenic, which is why they can't just go scoop it all up and throw it out on the field and use it for fertilizer. So
everybody wants you to burn it,
Well, and it stinks. I mean, it's not dangerous or anything, I don't guess, but it smells like rotten eggs when it's, rotting in the sun, piled up like a, 8-foot windrow, 12 feet wide. That's not what I want to do on spring break, is go deal with that. But here's a little map of where they're seeing red tide really bad right now. And, as the water warms up and the lings start heading our way, I would imagine that so will the red tide and the sargassum. The other thing that happened, according to Summerdale Police on March 15, 2023, at approximately 6:15 p.m., Summerdale Police conducted a traffic stop on a white 2013 vehicle, and, of course, they found fentanyl pills, Xanax, a couple of Glocks, and one of them with a round drum magazine. And these were two young men from Prichard going down to spring break to hang out with little Johnny and little Susie. So be careful where you send your kids, people, even in Baldwin County beaches.
Yeah, that's why Matt Simpson has an HB1 to really raise the penalties on those fentanyl traffickers like this dude.
Yeah, well, I saw he did that. That's probably one of the best things he's done. I don't speak too highly of him, but that was one piece of legislation that is outstanding, and I hope it gets passed because that's
fast tracked.
I'll give y'all a glass half full account of Matt Simpson. He's the best we got. That should scare you.
That's your problem in Baldwin County.
He's the best we got.
Country. I'm down here on the coast getting ready for red tide.
Yeah. So Brandon, what else what's coming up in the legislative session?
Probably the big thing that they're going to do early in the session, and we'll be on day 2 because of the special on Tuesday, is we're going to push the renewal and expansion of like the Alabama Jobs Act and the other incentives bill. The governor wants that. BCA wants that. I think everybody pretty much from both parts. I don't know who's even be opposed. That will be high priority. We're, as we come up before, that big budget surplus. They rolled $2 billion in surplus money in the education fund alone over from 2022 to 2023. We kept expecting the economy to collapse, and it didn't. So we kept rolling money from 2020 to 21, 21 to 22, to 2022 to 23. And we have like an extra $2 billion.
You think they're going to be, hopefully they'll start paying teachers a lot more.
Well, they already raised, one mistake we did make during the COVID was when we saw that 2020, when COVID all of a sudden started happening in the middle of the 2020 session, we nixed a pay raise for teachers. Y'all getting zero because we think the economy is going to blow up, when just the opposite happened and the economy did really strong. So when we started telling teachers, to go home and go back to work and go home and go back to work with the COVID, a bunch of them quit because they could get more money someplace else. And so we've already raised, teachers across the board, especially math and science. They did math and science first in 2021.
Oh, God. I hope
they came back and did a whole new teacher grid.
Yeah, they should not. I understand the concept of that, but that's dangerous. I've been having this conversation, like Mobile County School System, which has an outstanding superintendent now. He's losing, he got 92,000 seats. He's got 50,000 students. These public schools continue to lose, obviously students, which takes down the funding. That's problematic, and that's why I say pay teachers across the board. You start, doing just like police and fire and parity. That becomes problematic. There's a lot of things going on outside of that. Pumping money into trade schools is something they should be doing and looking at. But I bring up this. We're talking about the legislative session, Brandon. That's a good time for some legislator from Mobile to reform that Alabama Safety Institute and say this money just, the pistol permit fund that they took away, right? This could help the sheriffs fund themselves and make up for the lost revenue of the pistol permits and taking these driving schools away from these nonprofits. I don't see any real gain outside of them doing what the system is supposed to be doing anyway. But
back to your point about the system being archaic. So I'm going to give you a for example, the district attorney's bad check fund,
right,
20 years ago was $1.5 million. Now I bet you they don't bring in $50,000 in the bad check fund. And,
well, I mean, nobody writes checks anymore.
Exactly. So we got to come up with and that was probably a regressive way to get it revenued. Would y'all agree? Going after people that write bad checks. I mean, they obviously don't have any money. And if we lock them up, they can't pay the fines and so forth and so on. So
it's like child custody, unless you're a real deadbeat, there's no reason for you to be sitting in jail.
Well,
you're gonna let murderers and rapists loose, but you're not gonna let somebody's working trying to pay for a bill. But yeah, I get you.
Well, and then you have like fundamental problems, like the fact that the family courts in Alabama track $2 billion with a B in funds owed by non-custodial parents to the custodial parent. Now, just how many buildings full of computers do you think it takes to keep up with $2 billion owed $500 a month?
Yeah, I mean, and how many people do we have in Alabama?
I don't know, but everybody that goes in there must get an order, under the child support guidelines.
Brandon, this is just Matt Simpson's legislation on fentanyl. Hell, you can't. There's no doubt that I would support the DA's office in funding, but reform instead of reform funding. There's two places to put that money: teachers' pay raises, and obviously reforming the judicial system to where it can, fund. It literally has I went and took pen to paper. I'm not going to bore you with numbers, but I did this for a while. I can put 2 and 2 together, and the deal is I can get the court system to fund itself if you just reform it.
Okay, but
the fee, the funding, et cetera, that come into it, and be able to obviously increase your indigent, ability to take care of people who don't have.
If you would let the courts keep the money that they generate, would go a long way toward resolving some of the funding issues in the court systems, because there's all kinds of outflows. This like the checks go here, and the other money goes there, and there's a special, maybe a good, this does juvenile and this does wherever, and so it's like you would think you put more state troopers on the road, you'd have more money for state troopers, but it's not the way it works because of the way. They've taken, siphoned money here and siphoned money here and siphoned money here. So, judges and troopers actually, even though they generate more money than they cost, the money doesn't go back to their cost. Right. It goes 10 other places.
Yeah.
Right. But you guys got to quit thinking about the court system as other. It is as important as having a building for the legislature to meet in. It is as important as, highways and rails and ports and all these other things that we don't expect to turn a profit or support themselves. It is a function of the state. It is one of the 3 branches of government that the legislature is compelled to fund to some extent. And, I don't know what the threshold of pain is, but it's going to, I tell you when it's going to start affecting things is when it starts hitting the Business Council of Alabama members in their pocketbooks. That's when we'll see somebody giving a damn. But until then, I don't see them funding the court system. It's just a nuisance.
I wish it was back in 2010.
Bet. So, Mr. Nodine, you got anything else on your radar besides going and hunting Gordon Waller down?
No, I don't get. I mean, Gordon Wallen. Gordon, bless his heart. I hope justice prevails, but certainly, I think it's going to be an interesting political season coming up. I think Mobile is going to have some changes. A lot of successes, but I think we're losing people. I think this urban sprawl and the growth of South that Brandon and I were just talking about, with this money in the bank, I hope gets put to use in a productive manner. And the problem is when the economy is good, it's very difficult to find people to build roads and bridges and infrastructure. And I don't feel that our infrastructure, certainly not in Baldwin County, is keeping up with the success of the port. Obviously, that bridge, we keep seeing, I see Mississippi was able to obtain a bigger grant than we were on the I-10 bridge. Probably needed, I'm sure, just like most infrastructure, but I'd like to see them start putting this money to use. You have a gasoline tax that was instituted. You have this CARE Act money. I just hope the legislature puts it to and gets the governor a good game plan on where to present this money. And like I said, I think teacher pay raises, I go to Pensacola quite often now. I run into more people from Mobile that live in Pensacola and just commute to work now. And I think you're starting to see that even in Mississippi. So I think people are, yes, they're moving to the South and we're having success, but we better start, focusing upon, the real things that mean something and not, frivolous activities.
All right. So you guys need to pick up a lanyap this week, and not for one of the articles over in one of the where I would imagine they would typically place an advertisement. There is a public notice, and it has a map showing us the boundaries of the tax increment finance district.
Mm.
And so it doesn't say what they want to change. It doesn't say what they want to change. It just says we want to change the parameters. And I'll guarantee you this is for one business in particular. And I'm not smart enough to figure out who it's for, but they are amending the tax increment finance district in downtown Mobile.
Downtown Mobile, they cite that one, and it's out, just like Pensacola's, that it's outlived its purpose. I just saw that the Downtown Alliance, they have about 5 of these nonprofit organizations in one. And I've known Elizabeth Sanders for quite some time and actually helped when I was a lobbyist for the Merchants Association back in '98 when I first came up here. They just sent $1 million of taxpayers' money up to Kentucky for people to pick up trash. So these bid districts are created. They put somebody in, and they, the intent purposes are well. Spanish Fort has what was it? Not a TIF district over there for the Bass Pro Shop that didn't work out well. These things outlive their usefulness, and we don't need to be taxing and taking away school board tax, by the way, even though they say they're not, they are. That's why we don't allow Airbus and ThyssenKrupp and the rest of them that we do tax incentives for. We make sure the school board is included. These TIF, my fear is you start creating these TIFs, you'll start creating them everywhere. Theodore out there in Wilmer, and people will start to want to have their own little communities and duplicate government. And that's the problem I have with it.
So, Brandon, what do you think about TIFs? Are you familiar? The city of Mobile goes in and invests in, so we'll make it more attractive for commercial development, and then they pay themselves back through the new taxes that are created. And then once everything's paid back, the TIF goes away. It sunsets in 30 years.
Well, it's like the tax incentives that we have to have. It's like we have 2.6% unemployment. What is the purpose in offering incentives to hire more, to pay businesses to hire people if you're at full employment?
Because they're going to move here from Mossburg.
It's like Baldwin County was the fastest growing county in the state, and we decided to add aluminum plant to it. Not against the aluminum plant's cool, but at some point, someone in government needs to say, hey, I like the incentive idea, but this may not be the time for it, or may have outused its usefulness.
Well, and you got to remember, COVID showed us that, having an undiversified economy where 90% of your revenue comes from tourism, that's not such a good recipe for success, right? So,
there are flaws there, but I mean, again, you're offering incentives to. I mean, they want to create a new like $200 million fund here out of the education dollars to give grants to small town businesses. It's like if a small town business has customers, he'll make money, and someone will be a small town business. Why do I need to give a business a grant to be a business?
Well, I agree with that. And though I was on, as you both know, the Airbus and ThyssenKrupp, those are two of the largest incentive deals in Alabama history.
Yeah, and again, we were competing with other states there.
That's correct. We were competing with other states, and we knew this Airbus, obviously, with aerospace, was a big, huge getter, and the steel mill was also because it was state of the art. So there's times for those incentives, like Brandon's saying, but there's a time to pull back. And when you're at full employment and you have people wanting you to have a right to work state, we're not in the position we were in 2001 when we were, bleeding, workers to the shipyards in Mississippi and all, and paper mills shutting down. So, we're in a good position. And Brandon, your point to me, I keep saying that having that money in the hand, you want to give tax rebates to $400 a person, and the governor wants to do that. And, that the deal is you're going to piss somebody off that's not going to get a tax break. And that's problematic when you start, trying to give this money back to the people, which I'm all for, but it should be done probably in ad valorem. And that's an investment, that you make inside the state. Every dollar in ad valorem is an investment of where
part of the argument for the $400 checks everybody is theoretically supposed to get if it passes is we have a $2 billion surplus that keeps rolling over. Do you want to grow government with it, knowing we probably have more government revenues now than we'll have 2 years from now when this economy starts to wind down all this ARPA money, or just one way to get rid of our reserve funds are full. The state is sitting on like $10 billion in cash. They just got invested all over the place. If you hire more people or mental health workers or we're trying to hire teachers and teachers' aides and prison guards and state troopers, and we can't find them because nobody wants to do that kind of work anymore.
All right.
You don't want to create something where, then in 3 years, when we get to a normal economy without $55 billion in federal money floating around, where all of a sudden revenues drop and all these people that we talked into going into this cool career, create a career for because we have money to spend, all of a sudden you're telling them, oh yeah, now we're prorating our budget and we're getting rid of you. That's something that is definitely troubling the state legislature at the moment because they have grown state government a bunch in the last 3 years. And again, they've got $2 billion left over.
A Republican legislature, let's point out. That is not very Republican of us.
Well, they keep getting more money and they're spending money. I was here when, in right after the Great Recession, when Republicans first took over, and we went from a 2008 general fund budget of like nearly right around $2 billion. All of a sudden we were down to $1.6 billion and trying to figure out, which agencies, employees we need to get rid of.
We have a super majority, by the way, Harry, in the House, the governor. I mean,
we're almost there, Steve. We can just legislate our way into utopia. That's the promise of the Baldwin County Republican Party. I quit drinking the Kool-Aid a while ago because we can't even find a decent bunch of people to serve here in Baldwin County. Why would we think we could send leadership up to Montgomery? And, more of the same over in Mobile. Just go look at the Gordon Waller thing and the fact that They didn't change their internal controls. They didn't become the Catholic Church and the Boy Scouts and say, oh, hell, we're going to do everything we can to make sure this doesn't happen again. The director I talked to the other day, Stephen, told me that nobody believed that he was guilty and they couldn't believe that he absconded. Certainly wasn't the conversation I was expecting to have with the director of the Alabama Safety Institute.
To me, if you're innocent, why would you flee?
There you go. Why would you flee to the Philippines?
Well, have y'all ever seen like a mob movie where there's the guy in charge and then there's the guy that goes and gets everybody coffee while they're talking about business? It may be that he was the coffee go-getter and there were a lot more powerful people that just wanted him to go away.
I believe in 15 years, he isn't still living off those yard sale proceeds.
No way in hell. No way.
You still got it there, Mosley.
All right, guys. Well, I appreciate your time, and we will see y'all next Friday.
Brandon, you have a good one. Harry.
Farewell.